and I will give a floor for Ksenia Malich from School of Economics, Moscow School of Economics filial in St. Petersburg. And Ksenia was several times in the Netherlands, and I hope you can share your screen now.
So the subject of Russian-Dutch relationships during 1920s, 1930s is well observed, of course, in the historical literature. Nigeman, Van Lochem, Stam, other Dutch architects and engineers, they worked in the USSR, and of course researchers were much interested in their work. But in this report, I will focus on some other aspects, and in particular, it's the specific features of mutual reception and mutual interpretation of foreign architectural and urban practices, both by Dutch and by the Soviet architects. And it's interesting to look on this communication between Dutch and Soviet architects from the point of view of their professional goals. And you know that there were not only those architects who came to the USSR because they have working contracts. A lot of people were coming for a trip as ordinary travelers. And there were a lot of trips organized for architects, especially in 1930s. And it is very interesting to see how the Russian architecture was officially presented to the Dutch specialists who came in the USSR. And of course, it's interesting to understand what Soviet officials needed from the Dutch professionals. On the other hand, we can examine what professional goals Dutch architects had and what was their reception and interpretation of Soviet architecture. And so let's consider some cases. In 1920s, there were a lot of visits to USSR organized by artists and different artistic groups, and they organized these trips by themselves, like Peter Alma and El Lisitsky. But in 1930s, it came from above. The Soviet government had large ambitions to build a brand new city, brand new environment for a new world, and they needed professionals who was really experienced in mass housing, in urban planning, in building industrialization. So as Dutch architects were among the pioneers of residential dwelling projects and social engineering methods, of course, they were welcome guests. And in summer of 1927, there was a large exhibition of modern architecture in Moscow, which included a lot of Dutch pieces. But even more important was the exhibition of contemporary Dutch art held in Moscow in 1932. And it was a kind of a traveling exhibition. It was shown not only in Moscow, but also it went further to Leningrad and then to Kharkov. And this show was organized by VOX, the All-Union Society for Cultural Relations, and for cultural relations with foreign countries. And it was organized by VOX actually to promote the most progressive members of Dutch architectural modernism. And of course, a functionalist school dominated the exhibition, confirming that their position is like the ideological twins for Soviet architects. But what is an interesting point? The political views of the architects who were shown on this exhibition were not relevant for the organizers at all, because we can see that many Dutch architects shared socialist views, but they still worked in traditional style, and they belong, for instance, to Delft School, and they were not selected for the exhibition. Also, some architects like Van Lochem or Stam were also left out despite their sympathy for the radical social reforms. The organizers focused on the new architectural typologies and bright images of the modern movement. There were what they have chosen for this exhibition. There were some designs of new school, like open air school by Duiker and Montessori school by Groenewegen. There were some prototypes for dwellings, like standard blocks by Van Estern and Merkelbach and Elling. There were some recreation objects like famous Duiker Sanatorium and sport arenas by Jan Will, of course, industrial buildings by Van Esteren. And there were even some bourgeois locations such as banks and private houses of Brinkmann and van der Vlucht. So the exhibition to the audience, it was presented with the image of the new road that was to emerge in the Soviet Republic. And I should say that, of course, you know that, especially my Dutch colleagues know that there was a national exhibition committee in the Netherlands. And this committee was focused on propaganda in Dutch architecture abroad. And of course, they have in their archive a lot of pictures, both by contemporary functionalism architecture and by contemporary traditional and Delft school architecture. But Soviet officials have chosen only those projects which they found more progressive. But ironically, it was 1932 when the official course started changing from avant-garde to historical heritage. Slowly, but it was exactly the same year. A large number of Dutch visitors to the USSR in general took place in the early 1930s, as already we understand from the previous report. And there are several reasons. These trips were organized, were arranged with the help of Vox from one side and with the help of the Soviet travel agency Intourist, and it was founded only in 1929. And there was a crisis in world travel and industry in 1929, 1930, but already in 1931, Intourist started active work full of enthusiasm. And if in 1929 there were about 2,000 and a half foreign travelers who visited the USSR, in 1933 it was already about 9,000 visitors. And trying to overcome diplomatic isolation and, most importantly, to conceive the Western public of the advantage of the progressive social order, the Soviet government took extraordinary measures. And that is why the interwar period was the heyday of Soviet cultural diplomacy. And Olga Kameneva, the chairman of Vox, has repeatedly stressed that the main stake in this work should have been made on attracting the attention of Western intellectuals, since it was in this environment that public opinion was formed. But the main focus at that time was made on the contacts with the writers. And there were only 2 specialists in architecture among 33 members of Vox. Architectural section of Vox started working only at the beginning of 30s. That's why the majority of foreign architects and Dutch architects who visited as travelers the USSR, all these visits, they were starting from 1931, 1932. And Red Paper, famous newspaper, which was published in Leningrad, has written in July 1932. So I will quote here. Different languages on the streets, lines of Lincolns near the hotel entrances, huge ocean ships on the embankments. 6,000 tourists visited Leningrad in 1931. It will be 1.5 times more next year. The tourists are enjoying Hermitage and surroundings, but their main longing is to get to manufacturers, fabrics, schools, sanatoriums. Friends and enemies are equally interested in our achievements, though they have different reasons for it. So it sounds very enthusiastic indeed. And in 1931, 1932, there were really a lot of groups of foreign architects, and Dutch architects were also among them. And in tourist guides, I am speaking now about Leningrad, they made a special excursion program for these guests. And this program included main historical sites, of course, like Hermitage and St. Kazan Cathedral and some former imperial summer residences. But of course, the main focus was made on the new constructivistic buildings, like Moskovsko-Narsky House of Culture, factory kitchens, new dwellings on Traktorная Street, new House of Culture on Dekabristov Street. And so they were very much aware about how to show the new way of life in the country. And travelers were not allowed to go themselves wherever they want. And also a lot of meetings with architects, with Soviet architects and engineers were arranged during such kind of trips. What also I should add here, as also Herman has noticed, speaking about Weidewald, he noticed the very poor style life. And also, as I have seen from the different evidences, foreign visitors were not satisfied with the level of building works, with the quality of the materials, and when they were observing contemporary architecture that they were shown. And there were also a lot of complaints on bad food, lack of hot water, rather poor clothes. And not only architects have noticed this, because you maybe know the famous English writer Pamela Travers. He traveled exactly at this time to the USSR, and she left a lot of very interesting notes. And she was very impressed by classical architecture of Leningrad, but all other things was like a disaster for her, and she was very, very critical. But coming back to the Dutch architects and their reception, it's not surprising that the radical changes in Russian artistic life caused a strong interest among many Dutch architects. Russian constructivists had the opportunity to implement their most progressive ideas on a large scale, and there was also a common urge for a kind of idealistic social constructions and progressive ideas on a large scales. And the use of architecture is the paramount tool for creating social well-being. And maybe we can also say that socialist ideas took the form of the new religion, treated not so much as a kind of political doctrine, but as a new aspiration. And German, Dutch architects who worked on the standard residential neighborhoods units for workers in Magnitogorsk and other cities of the Urals and Siberia. In fact, the Soviet government wasn't interested in the ideology behind the modern movement, because instead they desired quick and cheap results. And that's why the most interesting projects were left unreleased. Planning new workers' cities, Dutch architects developed the entire living infrastructure, including variable typologies of leisure time and public life, like theaters, restaurants, stadiums, playgrounds, and all these projects left, of course, unimplemented. And you can see these beautiful quick sketches for the restaurant in Kislovodsk from Johann Nigemann archive, and it's an example of such kind of things. And it looks very bourgeois, yes, with these jazz instruments for jazzing, with this whiskey wine bar on the background. And of course, now we can now from the height of the 21st century, we understand that nothing of these could be implemented. And by the middle 1930s, Dutch architects were giving up on their hopes also. Critical responses to the Dutch projects had started appearing in the Soviet press. And you can see here a small document here on the right. This is a handwritten document. It's a Soviet functionary's conclusion on Nigemann project for housing for workers in Magnitogorsk. And this conclusion tells that the constructive part is absolutely undeveloped, and the conclusion is labeling it an impractical program. Speaking about further fate of Dutch architects, some architects left upon realizing that low standards in the construction industry and poor infrastructure would never allow them to turn their ideas into reality. Some had not leave the country, had to leave the country because of their growing suspicion of Soviet society. And of course, I think it's a well-known information, like Mark Stam was accused on anti-Soviet activity because he had considered Alma-Ata unsuitable for living and refused to design anything for this territory. And finally, after the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, the situation changed and the number of visits also slowly went down. And the next time when the international travelers will come back to the USSR will be already the times of the Khrushchev thaw in 1950s. But what's also important is that all these failures in the USSR and the World War, the Second World War, they did not put an end to their dreams. On the contrary, it further exacerbated a painful sense of imperfection in the surrounding world and the desire to escape beyond the limits of traditional architectural discourse. And so, of course, Dutch architects, they continued what they were dreaming about before the Second World War, and they continued what they started already at the USSR. And this is the sketch of Nigeman. It was made in 1946, and at the end, and on the bottom of the list, you can see the notice: the collective approach does not abolish the individual. And here is also the project of Nigeman. One of the sketches is for Magnitogorsk, and another one is for Nagele. It's a doctor's house, and these projects they have very much in common. You can see it, of course. Finishing my report, I should say that when in 1950s, after the Second World War, during the period of Khrushchev thaw, a lot of international architects were coming to Soviet Union. These were British groups, French, Italian, Polish, but there are no Dutch groups. And I have looked through a lot of archive materials, and sometimes you can see Dutch names there, but not so much. So there is no mentioning about increasing of Soviet-Dutch relationships. And I think that the main reason is the failure of these contacts before the war. So thank you for your attention.